Good afternoon. Welcome to the plantation. I'm your host, Master Gabriel. Firstly, Happy New Year to everyone. Happy New Year to the fake people. Happy New Year to the original people. Happy New Year to the white supremacists. Happy New Year to the black consciousness. Happy New Year to the slaves. Happy New Year to the slave owners and the slave masters. Happy New Year to my brothers and sisters across the world. Happy New Year to my brothers on the continent of Africa. And also Happy New Year to everyone in my home country of South Africa. May you have a pleasant and a wonderful festive season and a safe transition into the new year, and may you have a prosperous start for 2025. That is for you individually and for those around you, your community and your family. Happy New Year, slaves. Now, no one has been saying much around the conflict in the Eastern DRC. For one reason, maybe it's biasness, maybe the so-called corporate-run media does not like talking about African humanitarian issues. They would love to display Africa as an impoverished continent and also a continent that cannot sustain itself by its own people. Now, what caught my attention is that the Palestinian conflict in Gaza between Israel and the people of Palestine through the vehicle of Hamas. We must also understand that the Palestinian conflict is not everything. And what I cannot fathom is this particular conflict in Gaza is constantly being perpetuated throughout the world. There is a big outcry, there is a big drive of support behind it. I'm not saying that everyone that is oppressed and everyone that is in some form of conflict should not be catered to. However, this is not the only conflict in the world, and I feel that we're prioritizing other issues beyond our own issues, and therefore I say this with the international community that was rallying behind the Free Palestine movement and the Free Palestine tweets, Free Palestine slogans, Free Palestine flags, Free Palestine propaganda, Free Palestine this, Free Palestine that. That was all being driven. Yes, there was good intent and good cause behind it. However, how come is the world not talking about the conflict in Eastern DRC? I guess because it's an African country, it doesn't deserve international attention. So I'm going to have a look. I came across a particular article, a write-up, and this basically just gives a summary of the conflict in the various parts of the Eastern DRC, and then there's also a timeline, a detailed timeline of every event, so that we can understand the root cause of the conflict before we pinpoint fingers and before we blame anyone. Let's also try and understand the history behind the conflict and where it all began. Because trust me, this is not just some mere conflict and some disagreements between corporations, the Eastern DRC natives, and then the stakeholders and the outside interests that are coming in, basically for the resources. So it's just not something off the back that it's just a mere disagreement. There's a lot of context to it and a lot of pain behind it. And I just want to share that because I feel there is an important part about us actually paying attention to Africa. I'm not saying fuck Palestine. I'm not saying fuck Russia and Ukraine. All I'm saying is if we are Africans, we have conflict on our continent and we want to bring it to the attention of the international world or the international global or international stakeholders whatsoever. Why are we not the driving force behind our conflict, and why are we also not the driving force of actually gaining momentum and the support from international stakeholders and state and non-state actors to assist in actually coming to some form of diplomacy and also some form of agreement? If that has to include a ceasefire, by all means, but there has to be some form of international intervention at some point. There must be a international intervention. And if we are constantly pushing the narrative of Free Palestine and prioritize our foreign policy, looking at the stark reality and the shaky relationship between people of Palestine and Israel, then clearly we are delusioned, because why would we place other people's interests, their own national interests, above our own? This why I spoke about in my previous video about national interest. It's not within our national interest to free the people of Palestine and take the government of Israel to the ICJ, International Court of Justice. However, it's not our duty to. Now, with the conflict in the DRC, where do we see that same momentum for the role players that's involved in that conflict, that are guilty of displacing people, that are guilty of enabling factions, enabling bad relations, enabling a hostile environment because of interest, enabling the rebel forces, enabling the particular assistance from various other liberation armies, etc.? All of that involved. Where are those people? Why are those people not being taken to the ICJ? Because guess what? It's an African country, and the same energy that applies for Israel and Palestine's conflict will not actually apply to African conflict. So let's have a look. Now, this is according to the Conciliation Resources, the write-up that I mentioned earlier in my conversation. Now, I'm going to go through a quick summary of what their understanding is of the conflict, as well as a focus on what is this all about. Now, I will post a link to this particular write-up in my video, or you'll find it in the subject of the video. The links to the various sources will be there so that you can get a full analysis and in-depth understanding of what this Eastern DRC conflict is all about. Now, according to Conciliation Resources, let's have a look. The history of the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's understand this. Once infamous for their widespread atrocities in Uganda, the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, Lord's Resistance Army, is now scattered among the border regions of Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. Since 2008, an estimated 7,600 people have been abducted by the LRA in these three countries alone. So check out this. You got the Lord's Resistance Army, the LRA. They abducted 7,600 people in these various countries. That is Congo, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. Northeastern DRC. In the remote border regions of northeastern DRC, the LRA have been able to survive and even thrive. The rise of the LRA, criminal gangs and armed cattle keepers, and the absence of effective governance and security have combined to form a deadly mixture of violent crime, land-based conflict, and displacement. The LRA has a particularly devastating effect on young people in this part of the country, largely because they are frequent targets for abduction. Those who manage to escape often struggle to reintegrate into their communities and must deal with the emotional trauma of the violence they were exposed to. So, according to this particular write-up on the northeastern part of the DRC, this LRA has been thriving in that area as well. And secondly, they have an influence on the young people, because young people are often abducted. Remember that statistic of 7,600 people. Now, I'm assuming based on the northeastern DRC and the abductions, predominantly the abductions that are being pulled out there and being done are mostly towards young people. And they have a negative effect on them because these young people are struggling to reintegrate back into society. And second to that, they are having to deal with the trauma of the violence that they are exposed to. That is a very, very negative and knock-on effect psychologically. So I could understand the severity of the LRA and the ambitions of just abducting people. The Eastern DRC. Deep-rooted mistrust between civilians and security forces in one of the main drivers of conflict. So I'll say that again. Deep-rooted mistrust between civilians and security forces in one of the main areas are one of the main drivers of conflict. Just a disagreement between civilians and security forces, but they say it's deep-rooted. Over 120 armed groups operate in this region, which hosts around 4.5 million internally displaced people, the highest number in Africa. So in the Eastern DRC, according to Conciliation Resources, they mention here that because of the deep-rooted mistrust between the civilians and the security forces, these are one of the main drivers of conflict in the Eastern DRC. Now remember, there's more than 120 armed groups operating in that region alone. And on top of that, 4.5 million people have been displaced. And according to statistics, this is the largest displacement in Africa currently. Limited response to community early warning reports as to the perception that the FARDC, so that is FARDC, Forces Armées de la République Démocratique du Congo. So that is Forces Armées de la République Démocratique du Congo. That is the FARDC. Is ineffective or unwilling to protect communities. In return, the FARDC commanders are frustrated by a lack of civilian support. Now let's go back. First, they say there's a deep-rooted mistrust between civilians and security forces, which are one of the main drivers of conflict. Then the FARDC, their commanders are frustrated because there's a lack of civilian support. Well, in all fairness, if there's a mistrust between civilians and security forces, how on earth can the FARDC expect civilian support when there is a deep mistrust between those two? Now, with regards to Conciliation Resources and their work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, they say that they work both the northeast and also the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, supporting grassroots peace-building initiatives which are tailored to the specific conflict issues in these regions. That is very, very interesting. In the northeast, their work comprises and supports the involvement of young people in preventing conflict in these areas affected by the Lord Resistance Army, the LRA, remember, as well as training and peace-building techniques. They also support young people who were abducted by the LRA to return to their communities and overcome a trauma of captivity. In the Eastern DRC, they are working to improve the strained relationships between civilians and the military. Remember, deep-rooted mistrust between civilians and the security groups, and there's over 120 operating in that region. So it's quite something to manage. They state here that dialogue workshops and radio broadcasts provide rare opportunities for youth groups, women, community leaders, Congolese authorities and security forces to exchange ideas and build channels for communication and collaboration. Now, shout out to Conciliation Resources. This is their write-up about the conflict in the various regions of the DRC, which would include the northeastern DRC as well as the eastern DRC. Now let's have a look at the timeline behind this, because we must understand, as much as there are facts and there are substance about why this conflict is happening, we need to understand what is the root cause of this conflict as well. So let's have a look at the timeline. Now this timeline was basically compiled by concernusa.org. Now this is basically just a brief summary of the timeline of the conflict that has happened in the DRC since the colonial period, because that has to be included, because I feel that that has a connection with the conflict that is happening in the modern day era versus the conflict that happened during the colonial period, or should I say the period of colonization. Now let's understand, Concerned Worldwide, US, they did this particular analysis of this. I'm going to just share with you what their understanding is, and also the timelines of the various conflicts that have taken place, which basically cements the ongoing conflict in the Eastern DRC as of 2025. Now let's see. In the year 1500 to 1800, 5 million people were lost. Now let's understand what that means. 5 million slaves were captured from what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo and sent to the Americas. So this reminds me of the transatlantic slave trade. So 5 million slaves were taken during the period of 1500 to 1800 and sent to the Americas. That is a tragedy. 1885 to 1908, this is the beginning of colonization for the DRC. Belgium's King Leopold II, he launches a 75-year colonial period marking by forced labor, exploitation of natural resources, disease and mass killings. I'll repeat that again. Between the period of 1885 and 1908, this marks the beginning of colonization. The Belgian King Leopold II, he launches a 75-year colonial period which is marked by forced labor, exploitation of natural resources, disease and mass killings. Now, one needs to ask this question. The Jewish Holocaust is always spoken about in the international community. Yes, the German government have paid their reparations, but has the Belgian king, the Belgian monarch, the descendants of King Leopold, the Belgian government, have they actually paid any reparations to the DRC for their involvement, their pillage, and also the capturing of 5 million slaves, and on top of that, the 75-year period of forced labor, natural resources exploitation, disease and mass killings? I don't see any historians talking about this openly in the international arena, international media as well. I do not see academics talking about this openly. Is it because these are more Africans that were killed and therefore the Holocaust is more meaningful than the actual reign of one of the most atrocious monarchs since the British Empire as well? So ask yourself this question: why is no one talking about King Leopold II and its disastrous period of pain and terror for 75 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo? The Congo Free State, established by land grab in 1885. The Congo Free State. This was established through a land grab in 1885. It becomes the official colony of Belgium in 1908. Wow. Later, academic research suggests that during Leopold II's rule and its immediate aftermath, Congo's population may have been reduced by as many as 10 million people. Now, the Holocaust, 10 million Jews were never killed in gas chambers and horrific camps. During the reign of King Leopold, this is according to academic research, they suggest that the aftermath of King Leopold's 75-year reign and hold on the people have reduced the population of Congo by more than 10 million. So what if part of the forced labor, exploitation of natural resources, disease and mass killings, what if proportionately mass killings represents a huge part of that 10 million people? Has the Belgian government paid reparations to the people of Congo for the atrocities from King Leopold II? Well, we have to find out. I do not know. We could definitely discuss the answer to that question in my next video. 1960. In May 1960, Patrice Lumumba, he was elected the Democratic Republic of Congo's first Prime Minister. For 4 months later, in September 1960, he is overthrown via a military coup led by Colonel Joseph Désir Mobutu. Now, with the assistance of the Belgium and the US, Mobutu himself begins a 36-year reign as a dictator. Now, let's just go back on the timeline. From 1885 to 1908, King Leopold, he launches his 75-year hold on the people of Congo, which is marked by forced labor, exploitation of natural resources, disease, and mass killings. Now, according to that academic research and study, they mentioned that the population of Congo was reduced by more than 10 million. Now, fast forward to 1960, so that is 1885 and 1908. Now we move to 1960, whereby the military coup occurred when Patrice Lumumba was made first prime minister. Now, this is very, very interesting. Congo comes out of a 75-year reign from King Leopold II, and then approximately 42 years later, or 52 years later to be exact, this happens. From a 75-year reign of a absolutely atrocious monarch to a dictator, which adds another 36 years of more terror. Now, ask yourself this question: is that normal or is that strange? Now, remember, Mr. Mobutu, Colonel Mobutu, remember, he was appointed as the dictator for Congo with the assistance from the US government as well as the Belgian government. Now, he is a motherfucking coon. 1971, Congo becomes Zaire. Now, Mobutu, he renames himself Mobutu Sese Seko. So remember, it was first Colonel Joseph Désir Mobutu, and then 1971, he renamed himself to Mobutu Sese Seko, and the country of Congo is changed to and renamed Zaire. This happened in 1971. 1994, the genocide occurs in the neighboring country of Rwanda. Now, that claims more than 800,000 lives. Let's go back on the numbers. King Leopold reduced the population of Congo by more than 10 million in that particular period of 1885 to 1908. The Rwandan genocide in 1994 only claimed more than about 800,000 lives. Now, you look at the scale of conflict, the scale of casualties. Now, let's look again at the Jewish Holocaust. Definitely not 10 million. More than 800,000, that's for sure. That's different. But not 10 million. So what do we talk about more? Jewish Holocaust, or do we focus on the Holocaust from King Leopold, which reduced the population by more than 10 million people? And that could exponentially be just mass killings alone. No one talks about that. Now, this particular genocide that they mention here, 994, the country's Hutu regime is removed by military force and hundreds of thousands flee into eastern Zaire. Some 50,000 will die in cholera outbreaks that sweep through the overcrowded refugee camps around the city of Goma. Now, this all happened 994 when the genocide in the neighboring country that claimed all those lives. May all their souls rest in peace, and may they find peace abundantly. 996, the First Congo War breaks out. Rwanda invades Zaire in an effort to root out rebel groups taking refuge there, sparking the First Congo War. This draws in neighboring Uganda, Angola, Zambia, and other armed groups. Now remember, Rwanda invaded Zaire, which sparked the First Congo War, Now, because of the rebel groups that are taking refuge in Congo, this particular war then allows their neighbors to get involved as well. Uganda, Angola, Zambia, and some other armed groups to assist with regards to this particular Congo war. This was 1996. 1997, Zaire, or should I say Zaire, becomes a Democratic Republic of Congo. So the first Congo war that happened in 1996, then 1997, Zaire becomes a Democratic Republic of Congo. The war comes to a gradual end, and Mobutu is deposed by rebel leader Laurent Kabila, who declares himself president and reorganizes Zaire as the Democratic Republic of Congo. While the human toll of the First Congo War isn't fully known, but it is estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands. Wow. 1998 to 2003, the Second Congo War. This begins with a rebellion led by ethnic Tutsi minority forces in the eastern DRC. Rwandan supports fuel a march westward, while Zimbabwe, Namibia, Angola, and others support Kabila's forces. Peace is achieved in 2003, but the war's deadly legacy continues to be felt in continuing ethnic violence. Now remember, instability, authoritarian leadership, and extreme poverty, these all came from the declared Laurent Kabila, which was now basically the person, or should I say the leader, which enabled the Second Congo War. This all define Congo's history to this day. Estimates for the number of people dead during the war and aftermath from the Second Congo War, 1998 to 2003, could easily range between 1 and 5 million people. These are the casualties of the Second Congo War. 2012 to 2016, the Kasai conflict. Now remember, there was already existing violence which ended 2003. Now we have to go forward to 2016, the Kasai conflict between 2012 and 2016. Continuing violence and instability is driven by armed groups in DRC's east. A conflict has been exploding in the Kasai region to the south of the country since August 2016. The result is the DRC's latest large-scale humanitarian crisis. In 2012, Jean-Pierre Pandi became chief of the Dibaya territory in Kasai, a stronghold of the main political opposition party. In DRC, chiefs hold a large amount of power and administrative control. While they are in political positions, they are recognized by the government. However, Joseph Kabila, president at the time, never officially recognized Pandi. This resulted in escalating tension between the region and the central government. When Pandi was killed during clashes between his fighters and government forces, a full-scale conflict erupted. Since then, more than 1.4 million people in Kasai have been forced to flee their homes. 2016 to 2019, the political instability and also the emergence of a new leader. Now, once the political tensions have escalated, since the then incumbent Joseph Laurent Kabila, or should I say Joseph Kabila, 11-year term ended in 2016. The son of the former president, Laurent Kabila, he was the first to be democratically elected since 1960. Amid mounting pressure, growing opposition, and increasingly violent protests, Kabila stepped down in January 2019 and was succeeded by Félix Tshisekedi, the son of three-time Prime Minister of Zaire leader Etienne Tshisekedi. So that was the instability in that period. After the 11-year term ended of Joseph Kabila, and then also the son of the former president Laurent Kabila, which is himself. He was first to be democratically elected since 1960. 2021, Mount Inyiragongo Mount Nyiragongo erupts. Now remember, the DRC relies heavily on international trade. Once its affected economy by COVID-19 pandemic, incidents of domestic violence also escalate due to lockdowns. In the wake of this, Mount Nyiragongo, Nyiragongo, I'm trying. Nyiragongo erupts on May 22nd, 2021, forcing more than 364,000 people to flee their homes in Goma and the surrounding area. Many returned home within a few months. However, nearly 30,000 people have already been living in poverty and are pushed further backwards. This results losing their homes, land, and livelihoods. The same year, the country is named the world's worst food crisis by the United Nations. This is back in 2021. So let's fast forward. 2022, the escalation of more violence. Violence continues to escalate, especially in the eastern provinces of North and South Kivu. Despite an interagency scale-up in humanitarian response in the summer of 2023, conditions worsen in the early months of 2024. So check at this. 2022, the interagency scale-up for humanitarian aid in the DRC happens. And in that same response, the conditions now just worsen in the early months of 2024. How ironic. Concern for the Democratic Republic of Congo. 2024 marks the 30th anniversary of working in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is basically concern US or concern us. I'm assuming it is a United States agency. They work in the DRC. It basically marks the 30 years or the 30th anniversary of working in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Part of their work is to address the country's decades-long humanitarian crisis, particularly in the east. As a member of the Rapid Response Mechanism, Safer Consortium, SAFER, Concern responds to displacement by the DRC by providing emergency relief to those who need it most. Other programs allow Concern to respond to, including nutrition-related emergencies, food security shocks, and protracted needs in the sectors of wash and shelter. Last year, Concern has supported over 100,000 individuals displaced by conflict and natural disasters in DRC with emergency cash transfers, vouchers, and food distributions. We were also awarded a generous grant from the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office to fund essential nutrition, protection, livelihoods and inclusion programs in cooperation with 3 international partners and 1 national NGO. Concern and partners aim to reach over 400,000 vulnerable Congolese with life-saving support that will have a genuine, lasting impact. Now, with that said, and with that summary of the conflict that has began in Congo since 1885 with the reign of King Leopold, but we must also not forget 1500 to 1800, where 5 million slaves were captured from the DRC and sent to the Americas. That already introduced conflict. So all this conflict that has been happening since the 1500 up until 2025, that basically is the root cause. Now there are too many non-state actors involved there. As you mentioned, when I checked this particular timeline, where it clearly says 2022 up until current, with the upscaling of the agencies for humanitarian aid and support, how come in 2024 did the condition of the people worsen? Usually when these agencies or humanitarian aid agencies come in and assist and missionaries assist, you'd expect a turnaround to happen, a positive turnaround, because you're assisting with a critical humanitarian crisis. However, once you are assisting and providing much needed help, the least you are expecting is a better outcome. But in this instance, it worsened in the earlier months of 2024. Now we must ask ourselves why. Are there people benefiting from the conflict to continue? Or is there actually a genuine intervention for the conflict to stop in the Eastern DRC? Now remember, Eastern DRC and DRC itself is a mineral-rich country, potentially probably the richest country on the continent. Put all of that aside, how can a country like this be named the world's worst food humanitarian crisis? How can they have abject poverty in a country with such vast rich mineral resources? Now we have to look at the non-state actors and the state actors. Is there a genuine intent for the conflict to stop? And are there people benefiting from the conflict continuing? And are there people also benefiting from the conflict not continuing? Because remember, if chaos has to reign, anarchy will prevail. If peace reigns, then prosperity will prevail. Now, in this instance, if we can't make the country prosperous economically and we cannot restore its original relations and perhaps return the land with all the mineral-rich resources back to the natives, then surely peace in the region, economic prosperity is possible. Diplomacy is very important in this particular instance because there's a lot of interests at play. There's the Congolese people's interests at play here, and then there's also the outside interests at play, because whoever owns resources in that particular country are doing everything within their minds best to protect their interests. So if that means that the conflict must continue and the instability, remember, we must not forget the assistance from the US government and the Belgian government when Mobutu came into power. Now, fast forward in the modern day era, we must also not forget that very same government could still be involved and still have interests at play in the Eastern DRC or the resource-rich country, and doing everything to create chaos and instability so that their interests are protected and that they continue benefiting from the chaos. Because what is more threatening to a strong world, or should I say a new world order, is Africa being independent and strong, and also an African country rising and breaking the chains of slavery from these Western donors, Western companies, Western influence, and all these foreign aid. And people consciously taking an adaptation of, hey, this is Africa, this is the Congo DRC, we're probably the richest country on the continent. Why are we not owning the land, and why are we not mining our own minerals? Why are we not creating industries that could employ the people and also could reduce poverty over a very lengthy period? Similar to the project of China, the Eastern DRC, or should I say the entire DRC, should adopt. Get all the stakeholders out with all international influence with interest in the province needs to first come out. Then consolidate to the people and state as a government, we will consider taking the land and giving it back to the natives. Then you'll have to start educating the native people. Perhaps indigenous practices could be brought back because, as we know, before any of these motherfuckers arrived and colonized and conquered and divided, the land was basically worked by a lot of indigenous people. So there was a spiritual connection to the land and its people. Now, if we want Congo to be set free from all these change, we need to let go of all these influences and then consolidate, return the land back to the people. If they are willing and they can still make the land valuable, bring back the indigenous practices, and then through the indigenous practices start building indigenous industries so that you protect your industries, so that if any other outside influence does come in, your indigenous and domestic industries are protected. No jobs will be lost, but you'll still be able to supply a good finished product, and second to that, you'll be able to export it globally. The lesser the influence, the better the international relations. Once again, I want to say, my apologies, Happy New Year to all the slaves. May this be a prosperous year at the plantation. Once again, to my listeners, thank you for listening. To my viewers, thank you for watching. And to my slaves, thank you for being and stuck another year at the plantation. Thank you.